You're demoted." Bob smirked, twisting the corner of his mouth as he spoke. Did he lose his mind after I, his subordinate, caught him cheating with Sarah? What do you mean, demoted? Just 'cause you got caught red-handed, why am I the one in trouble? This makes no sense. Even if he's my boss, I can't back down now. You're a pain in the neck. Bob glared at me with contempt, then shifted his gaze to Sarah. I followed his lead and looked at Sarah too. We're a perfect match. Any feelings I had for her slipped through my fingers. There's no place for me here anymore. I see. So that's how it is. Well, I'm out. Sarah, make the most of what little time you've got left. I said this and left the hospital room. At this rate, Sarah doesn't have long to live, even though I'm the only one who can save her. My name's Michael Thompson. I'm a 41-year-old office worker. I work for a big beverage company in the marketing department. The marketing department's job is to pick up on changing consumer needs and create systems to keep products and services selling. So we've got to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world. I've got a wife. Her name's Sarah. She's 3 years my junior at the same company, what you'd call an office romance. We don't have kids yet. Neither of us is dead set on having them, so we're just letting nature take its course. We tied the knot 10 years ago. I was 31 and Sarah was 28. As soon as we got hitched, Sarah quit her job and became a full-time housewife. Seems she wasn't too fond of working. For about 5 years after getting married, like many couples, we had a sweet honeymoon phase. We'd go on an overseas trip once a year and celebrate our anniversary and birthdays at fancy restaurants. When we went out, holding hands was a given, and our nighttime activities were pretty normal, I'd say. I wouldn't say Sarah's a knockout, but she's got a face most guys would like. She's not flawlessly beautiful, but she's not just cute either. It's hard to pin down, but I guess you could say she's that kind of attractive woman. So I was head over heels for her. I loved her so much, I felt like I didn't need anything else as long as she was by my side. But as time went on, those feelings started to waver. Lately, you couldn't say we're doing well by any stretch. We fight every time we see each other. It's not just that we're not doing well, you could say we've got the worst marriage ever. It's cause of Sarah's spending habit. And her free-spirited personality rubs me the wrong way too. She's selfish and does whatever she wants. She keeps buying expensive designer stuff and pricey cosmetics and lives it up with her friends while ignoring me. While I'm eating a $5 lunch at the company cafeteria, Sarah's sipping champagne at some fancy hotel restaurant in the middle of the day. She'd go to South Korea saying it's for a spa treatment, or jet off to Europe claiming she's touring art museums. I don't think my salary's too shabby, but we're not just unable to save, we're in the red every month. It's no exaggeration to say our finances are a train wreck. We can't keep going on like this. When I try to point this out, she flies off the handle. It's more than I can take. Don't be such a tightwad. I didn't marry you to live with some penny-pinching miser. Look, money doesn't grow on trees. I'm working my tail off here. Can't you at least try to balance the books? I try to be as tactful as possible because I don't want to fight about money. But Sarah won't have it. If that's the case, why don't you balance them yourself? Just earn enough to cover what I spend. I married you because I thought you could do that. Telling me to cut back now is like fraud. Sarah's talking nonsense, telling me to earn back what she's wasted. Her gibberish is so off the wall, I can't even argue with her. In the end, she always gets her way. Lately, I've been thinking long and hard. I really messed up choosing who to marry. But recently, Sarah's spending habit suddenly calmed down. Well, she's still living it up, but her splurging isn't breaking the bank anymore. Sarah's still getting fancy clothes and expensive bags. If anything, she seems to be living larger than before, but the credit card bills don't match up. Worried she might be in debt, I confronted Sarah. How are you getting all this pricey stuff? There's no way my paycheck can cover it. What's the big deal? Since we can't afford it on your income, I'm buying secondhand or getting stuff from friends. Weren't you the one who said to balance the books? I'm doing my best here, so quit nagging me. Sarah tries to brush it off like this, but something doesn't add up. I can't imagine her going for secondhand goods. And would friends really give her such expensive stuff? Friends who pay for her meals and trips. That's fishy no matter how you slice it. She's out of the house more and more, and dressing flashier too. If she's not in debt, maybe she's got some sugar daddy. I started to have my suspicions. Even though she's pushing 40, Sarah's the type who never skimps on beauty care. So looks-wise, she hasn't aged a day. She could probably pass for someone in her 20s. So it wouldn't be surprising if she had some guy bankrolling her. She goes out at night and takes trips without me. There's plenty of reasons to be suspicious. Once I started thinking like this, it seemed more and more real, like it might actually be true. The shadowy figure of a man behind Sarah, a shadow that shouldn't be there, keeps flickering. But I couldn't say anything to Sarah about it. I felt like if I brought it up, our relationship would be over. I wanted to ask, but couldn't. Our married life went on with me carrying these conflicted feelings. Then one day, our household was rocked. It was the morning Sarah was supposed to leave for a trip. When she didn't get up by departure time, I went to check on her in the bedroom and noticed something was off. "Hey Sarah, isn't it time for you to head out?" As soon as I entered the room, I called out to her, but Sarah was curled up under the covers, making a groaning sound. "What's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" When I whispered by her pillow, I noticed her breathing was rough. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant and unfocused. When I put my hand on her forehead, she was clearly feverish. She'd often feel lousy from partying and being hungover, but I could tell right away this wasn't one of those times. Sarah was pale, furrowing her brow and breathing with difficulty. There's no doubt she's in a serious condition. I couldn't just leave her like that, so I called an ambulance. Time passed in a blur. She was rushed to the hospital for tests, and the doctor gave us the diagnosis: acute myeloid leukemia. The moment I heard the diagnosis, everything went dark. Our relationship had been awful lately, so I thought I didn't have any love left for her. I'd even thought it'd be fine if we split up. But the moment I learned about this diagnosis, she became someone special I had to protect, beyond just liking or disliking her. But even saying I'd protect her, this diagnosis is way too heavy. Thinking about Sarah's condition when she was loaded into the ambulance, I felt like she might not have long to live. It seemed that serious. From that day on, I vowed to devote everything to Sarah. I decided to let go of all the unpleasant things she'd done before, pray desperately for her recovery, and focus my life on taking care of her. Fortunately, Sarah's condition, which had taken a sudden turn for the worse, gradually began to improve. At one point, she was confined to a sterile room, and I felt hopeless, thinking I might never be able to hold her hand again. But now she's getting back to normal. The doctor told us they'd aim for complete remission through medication. When the medication started, Sarah suffered from its side effects and cried almost every night. It was very painful to see her like that, and I suffered along with her. The medication is carried out in several rounds. During the intervals, we could regain a peaceful daily life, but when it restarted, hellish suffering awaited us again. We aimed for remission through repeated hospitalizations and discharges, but the end was nowhere in sight. But it wasn't all bad. Through her battle with the disease, we spent more time facing each other, and our feelings became one. I devoted myself wholeheartedly to Sarah as she faced her illness head-on. Sarah, in turn, expressed her gratitude to me. I believed that if we could overcome this illness, we'd surely be able to restore our relationship to what it used to be. I believed that. But one day, just before she was to be discharged, I stumbled upon an unexpected scene in the hospital room. It happened on the day after she'd finished yet another round of the medication, as we were preparing for her discharge the next day. That day, I was called to the hospital by her doctor. I'd been told the doctor wanted to explain the future treatment plan, so I rushed over. I hadn't planned to visit Sarah that day since she was due to be discharged the next morning, but since I was at the hospital anyway, I decided to stop by her room. As I stood in front of the room, I could hear whispered voices from inside. One was Sarah's, and the other was a man's voice. At first, I thought maybe a friend had come to visit her. But from Sarah's sultry way of speaking and the man's voice, something seemed off. I nervously slid open the door to the room. At that moment, my eyes met Sarah's as she had her arms around the man's back. Sarah's eyes darted around. Then she hurriedly put some distance between herself and the man. The heavy atmosphere in the room clung to my whole body, making it hard to breathe. "What are you doing here? You didn't say you were coming to visit," Sarah blurted out, trying to dispel the atmosphere. "The doctor called me, so I came. Then I thought I'd stop by your room, Anne." I couldn't finish my sentence. The man who'd been listening to our conversation slowly turned around. From the way he turned unhurriedly, without surprise or panic, I realized this man felt no guilt. And when I saw his face, I was shocked. "Bob." "Why?" That's all I could say before I was struck speechless. "Bob is my boss. We see each other at work every day." And here was Bob, embracing Sarah in her hospital room. It wasn't just a friendly hug. It was clearly something between a man and a woman. "Hey, Michael. Guess the cat's out of the bag." "Well, can't be helped. You two were done for anyway, right?" Bob said with a mocking smile. "You two were done for." Bob's words echoed in my head. "Sarah, what's going on here?" I addressed Sarah, not Bob. Sarah avoided my eyes, staring blankly at Bob. There were no words, but the answer was clear. "It's just what it looks like. Sarah's gonna be with me now. Don't worry, I'll make her happy. A regular employee like you can't give Sarah what she wants." My anger rose at Bob's complete lack of remorse. At the same time, the past 6 months I devoted to Sarah felt meaningless. Was I the only one who thought we could get back to how we used to be? Even while I was taking care of her, Sarah's heart was turning towards Bob. Thinking about it that way made me sick of everything. "Bob, don't you have a wife and kids? Don't you have any shame as a human being?" When I spoke harshly, letting my emotions take over, Bob furrowed his brow. "Who do you think you're talking to? I'm your boss. How despicable of him to bring up workplace hierarchy in this situation. That's irrelevant. You're the worst kind of person." I spat out, knowing it was already hopeless. At that moment, Bob flashed a wicked grin. "You're demoted." Bob smirked, twisting the corner of his mouth as he spoke. Did he lose his mind after I, his subordinate, caught him cheating with Sarah? "What do you mean, demoted? Just because you got caught red-handed? Why am I the one getting shipped out? This makes no sense. Even if he's my boss, I can't back down now. You're a pain in the neck. Besides, you don't want to see me and Sarah getting cozy, do you? So go off to the countryside and start your life over." Bob glared at me with contempt, then shifted his gaze to Sarah. I followed his lead and looked at Sarah too. Maybe I wanted to confirm Sarah's feelings one last time. But what I saw on her face was ecstasy. We're a perfect match. Sarah gazed at Bob with dreamy eyes and buried her face in his chest. "This man has everything you don't. All you have is kindness." Kindness alone isn't enough to satisfy a woman. Any feelings I had for her slipped through my fingers. "There's no place for me here anymore." "I see. So that's how it is. Well, I'm out. Sarah, make the most of what little time you've got left." I said this and left the hospital room. At this rate, Sarah doesn't have long to live, even though I'm the only one who can save her. As I was leaving the room, Sarah handed me an envelope. Inside was divorce petition. Divorce petition that would be finalized if I filled them out. The moment I saw them, for some reason, I felt like laughing. I think I was amazed at Sarah's thoroughness in preparing such a thing while going through a difficult battle with illness. She was being cared for by me, yet she was gazing at Bob, not me. Thinking about that made me sick of everything, and I wanted to throw it all away. I didn't want to go to the company where Bob was, and I hated the room that smelled of Sarah. With those thoughts, I decided to submit a leave of absence to the company and go on a trip. I hadn't decided on a destination, but somehow I felt like going north, not south. Feeling that way, I decided to head for the northernmost point. 3 days after leaving home, I set foot in Alaska. I was spending a relaxed time to heal my broken heart. Suddenly, I got a phone call. Looking at my phone screen, I saw Sarah's name displayed. I wondered what she wanted, but I wasn't in the mood to talk, so I ignored it. However, no matter how many times I ignored it, the phone kept ringing at short intervals. It was so persistent that I thought about turning off the power, but that wouldn't solve the fundamental problem, so I pressed the call button. "Hello, Michael. Where are you now?" Sarah's weak voice grated on my ears. "If it's about the divorce petition, I've already submitted them. They've been accepted, so don't worry." Assuming the purpose of the call was to urge me about the divorce petition, I gave an answer different from what she asked. Then Sarah coughed lightly and continued with difficulty. "I don't care about the divorce petition. More importantly, why didn't you say anything?" Sarah was clearly not feeling well. She was different from a few days ago when she was with Bob. "What do you mean, I didn't say anything?" I had an idea what she was asking about, but I played dumb for now. "You're my donor, aren't you?" I heard it from the doctor. Even with her weak voice, Sarah's irritation came through. Actually, on the day I witnessed Sarah's affair, I was called by the attending physician to discuss this matter. Sarah had been aiming for complete remission through medication, but the effects weren't good. At this rate, she'd only lose strength due to side effects, and her condition wouldn't improve. So, it was suggested that we switch to bone marrow transplantation. For a bone marrow transplant, a donor matching Sarah's marrow is needed. The match rate is 1 in 4 for siblings. It's said to be a 1 in hundreds to tens of thousands chance for those not blood related. But Sarah's an only child, so she has no siblings. Therefore, we had to find a match among unrelated people, but by some miracle, it turned out I was a match. That's the result I was told that day. I visited Sarah's hospital room, eager to tell her this news. But there, I stumbled upon an unbelievable scene. "Looks like my bone marrow was a match, huh?" I answered coldly. If Sarah and Bob hadn't been like that, I would have gladly donated my bone marrow. But now I can't feel that way at all, and even the fact that I was miraculously a match seems irrelevant. "Looks like it was a match. How can you say it so coldly? You're not thinking of abandoning me, are you? Weren't you the one who abandoned me, Sarah? I had decided to devote myself wholeheartedly to you. But then you slapped me with divorce petition. Just forget about me. Find another donor." I said this and moved the phone away from my ear. Then I heard Sarah's cry. Wait a minute. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear even with the phone away from my ear. "Your only redeeming quality is kindness, right? If so, you shouldn't be able to abandon me when I'm suffering from illness. Please, come back quickly. I'm in pain." Sarah's agonized voice tightened my chest. But it's too much to say I should save her just because kindness is my only redeeming quality. Even if I donated and Sarah was saved, what would happen to me? I can only feel hatred. Even if I assisted Sarah and Bob, all I'd taste is emptiness. Look, I've decided to give up on kindness. Sarah, you said it yourself, didn't you? Kindness alone isn't enough to satisfy a woman. Don't ask me for kindness now. As I talked, I found it hard to breathe. Even if she's the object of my hatred, this is a matter of life and death. If I don't cooperate and Sarah dies, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I know that. I know, but I just can't come to terms with it. Don't say that. You loved me, didn't you? You must still have feelings for me. Put your hand on your heart and think about it. Well, you can't abandon me, can you? Sarah pleaded desperately. She was so forceful, I almost doubted if she was really ill. The image of Sarah and Bob embracing in the hospital room flashed in my mind. At the same time, I heard Sarah's pitiful voice. There's no way I can donate bone marrow in this situation. I'm sorry, but I'm a small-hearted man who can't forgive you, Sarah. Try looking elsewhere. If you're lucky, you'll surely find someone." I said this and hung up unilaterally. The ringtone sounded several times after that, and each time, my heart wavered. Unable to bear it, I decided to turn off my phone and ignore it. My journey, which started from the northernmost point of Alaska, has been 2 weeks now. Some people say time heals all wounds. I experienced the meaning of these words firsthand. By cutting off contact, Sarah's presence in my heart faded, and instead, the place of people I met on my journey grew larger. I had kept my phone turned off this whole time. In other words, I was disconnected from the online world and only living in the real world. There probably won't be any more calls. Thinking that, I turned on my phone for the first time in a while. Then, in less than half a day, the ringtone sounded. If Sarah's name had been displayed on the screen, I would have rejected the call. However, only a phone number was displayed with no name. I unconsciously pressed the call button. Then, a surprised voice echoed in my ear. "Oh, it connected. This is Thompson's phone, right? It's Bob." The moment I heard his voice, I felt a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach and regretted answering the phone. "Please, I beg you, hear me out." Bob spoke in the most humble manner I'd ever heard from him. Bob's story started with Sarah's condition. Apparently, Sarah's condition has been bad ever since I left on my trip, and they can't find an effective treatment. Medication has reached its limit, and the only hope is bone marrow transplantation. They're desperately searching for a donor. But so far, they haven't found one, and there's no end in sight. Thompson, please, cooperate with the bone marrow transplant. I really want to save Sarah, Bob said, as if squeezing out the words. It seems Bob's feelings for Sarah are genuine. But Bob has a wife and kids. How can I feel any sincerity when he's maintaining that relationship while being with Sarah? Bob's wife is related to the company president, so he probably can't divorce her because of the president, but it's too convenient to steal someone else's wife while protecting his position in the company. Moreover, Bob even said he'd demote me. After doing something so despicable, he wants me to cooperate for his mistress's sake. No matter what kind of person they are, I know life is precious. But as long as Bob's shadow flickers behind Sarah, I can't bring myself to cooperate. So I set a condition. I told him I'd agree to the bone marrow transplant if Bob stepped away from Sarah. Then Bob raised his voice. "That's meaningless. I want to be with Sarah. There's no way I can let her go. It's utterly exasperating." Bob doesn't really care about Sarah's life. He just wants to keep a beautiful woman like Sarah in his grasp. With all due respect, sir, don't you have a wife and a daughter too? Aren't you protecting the wrong people? Don't bring that up. It's none of your business. The humble tone he had when talking about Sarah disappeared, reverting to his arrogant attitude. "So Sarah will remain your mistress then? In that case, let's forget this conversation ever happened." As I said this dismissively, Bob hurriedly continued. "Wait a minute. I got it. Then I'll divorce my wife. I'll leave her and be with Sarah. How's that?" This surprised me a bit. I thought he'd never leave his wife to protect his position in the company. At the same time, I wondered if he really intended to divorce. He might just be saying this to trick me into donating bone marrow and then weasel out of it once Sarah's illness is cured. I could see right through Bob's tactics. So I decided to set a trap for Bob. "Can you really divorce your wife? Isn't your wife related to the company president? If I say I'll divorce, I'll divorce. I promise, so come to the hospital quickly." Bob's trying to summon me with a rough response. If he's gonna take that attitude, I'll take everything from him. I suddenly felt fired up. "Can you really divorce? If you divorce your wife, you won't be able to stay at the company. Can you take such a risk as a boss?" "I don't think you can," I said in an exasperated tone. Then Bob took the bait. "It's fine. I'll definitely divorce her. Besides, I never had any love for my wife. I only married her because the president pushed her on me. Compared to that ugly woman, Sarah's a diamond in the rough. I need Sarah. It has to be her." In the end, Bob shouted as if losing control. Hearing his voice, I made up my mind. "All right. If you're gonna say that much, I'll go to the hospital. I'll do the bone marrow transplant. But I'm surprised that you're so devoted to Sarah, sir. I hope Sarah reciprocates your feelings." I said this in a light tone and hung up. Now everything's in place. Sarah will probably survive, but Bob will lose everything. The next day, I suddenly returned to New York. I rushed to the hospital and offered to do the bone marrow transplant. After several weeks of preparation, the bone marrow transplant surgery was performed. The transplant was successful. The post-operative condition is good, and Sarah is on her way to recovery. Meanwhile, I had sent the contents of my conversation with Bob to the company president. Actually, on the day Bob said he'd leave his wife, I had recorded the call. This was none other than to strip Bob of his position in the company. If left alone, Bob would have gone back on his promise to me. I took the initiative to prevent that from happening. The president listened to the voice data I sent and was furious. Bob had been fully trusted, so the president's anger was apparently beyond imagination. Bob was cornered to the point where he couldn't stay in the company anymore and resigned. Moreover, Bob's wife found out about his betrayal and was furious. She left home with their daughter. Bob lost his wife and child, and on top of that, his job. All he had left was Sarah. However, even Sarah ended up abandoning Bob. I decided to tell Sarah, whose illness had started to settle after the bone marrow transplant, about the situation in the outside world. "Sarah, that's great," I called out to Sarah, who had been released from the sterile room. "Michael, it's thanks to you. Thank you for saving me." Maybe because her life was saved, Sarah's face showed straightforward gratitude. But Bob's figure still flickered in the depths of her eyes. "By the way, I heard Bob quit the company. Seems your affair was exposed, and he couldn't stay there anymore. His wife is related to the president, right? So he apparently incurred the president's wrath. Bob lost his wife and kid, and his social standing. Plus, his wife took all his assets, so he's penniless. All he's got left is you, Sarah. Given how things turned out, you'll have to support him now." As I spoke at length, Sarah's face visibly changed color. That's to be expected. Sarah's feelings for Bob were based on his position. She couldn't possibly be interested in a jobless, penniless Bob. Is that true? Yeah, it's true. He might show up here soon. I bet he'll say something like, "Sarah's all I have left now. You better be ready to accept him." When I said this in a mocking tone, Sarah furrowed her brow and looked like she was about to cry. "No way, I don't want that. I'm not interested in someone unemployed." "Hey Michael, why don't we go back to how we were? You saved me because you still love me, right? I won't ask for luxury anymore, so let's start over." I was surprised by how quickly Sarah changed her tune. I had anticipated Sarah abandoning Bob, but I never expected her to suggest getting back together with me. "Sarah, you're a terrible woman. Bob was prepared to divorce his wife to save you. He begged me to help, saying he'd divorce his wife and make you happy. And yet, here you are. Shouldn't you be there for him?" I said this hypocritically while sticking out my tongue in my mind. Then, Sarah openly showed an expression of disgust. "I don't want that. I was fine being his mistress. How's an unemployed, penniless man supposed to make me happy? Without money or power, Bob's just some old guy. Come on, Michael, let's start over. I'll make do with your income, please." I was amazed at how mercenary Sarah was, a far cry from her previous arrogance. This woman will never be happy, and she shouldn't be made happy. I regretted saving her to some extent. But conversely, by surviving, she's going to taste hell. Thinking that, I felt that maybe it was good that I saved her after all. "Sarah, I'm not starting over with you. Actually, I met someone wonderful during my trip. So I'm going to live in Alaska from now on. This is goodbye. We probably won't ever meet again. I saved you, so cherish your life." When I firmly announced our parting, Sarah turned down the corners of her mouth and stared at me. It was like the eyes of an abandoned puppy seeking salvation. In the past, I might have softened at such an expression, but now I feel nothing. "See ya." I turned away from her without hesitation. "Wait, Michael. You don't have to be so stubborn. You still love me, don't you?" The voice at my back sounded like the howl of a defeated dog. After that, Sarah was discharged following a few months in the hospital. Apparently, Bob came to the hospital many times during her stay, but Sarah refused to see him. What Sarah wanted wasn't kindness or love, but money and power. I should have realized this when I was dumped, but Bob, who couldn't see it, ended up making the same mistake. His company position, wife and child, the assets he'd built up, and his mistress. Having lost everything, Bob lost the will to work properly and is now reportedly living as a homeless person. As for Sarah, although she recovered from her illness, she's now living in poverty. I had submitted a leave of absence from the company, but ended up quitting and moving to Alaska. Before moving, I disposed of all my belongings, so Sarah has no assets left.